All right, well, I think positioning is so important that I'm going to include one more lecture on positioning. This is what I refer to as tricks of the trade. That is, if you want to establish a position for your product and you want to come up with a positioning slogan and campaign, here are a couple of things that I think you want to keep in mind. First trick of the trade is positioning programs are more verbal than they are visual. There is great power in words, and people are more likely to be able to repeat words than they are something that's visual. So you should be focusing on the audible versus the printed word. And the positioning statement should look good and sound good. And so the idea behind a positioning statement is it should be catchy. It should be something that embodies your position in a very simple phrase. For instance, Nike's "just do it." But focus on the words. Focus on a verbal campaign and not so much a visual campaign. That's a Buick. Maybe that's not so good. The secrets to finding a good name. Names are important, and they are more important if, in fact, you are a late entrant than if you're the first company in. Nike, well, is that a good name or a bad name? It's probably would not be a great name if I were trying to get into the market later, but they were the first ones in. Now think about someone like Under Armour. Is that a good name? Well, the answer is yes, it's a good name because it is directly locked into the product's benefits. That is, it's designed to provide you with protection. Protection from the cold, protection from the heat, or protection from injury. So Under Armour is actually a very good name for their product. All right, secrets of finding a good name. First off, make sure the name's available. When you remember that when the Mirage was first built here in Las Vegas, it turned out that there was a small hotel on the corner of Paradise and Flamingo, and it was called the La Mirage. And it ended up suing the Mirage over a name infringement. And eventually, Steve Wynn, who owned the Mirage at the time and was getting ready to open it, ended up having to settle with them and basically buy the rights of that name from them. Once again, initials aren't names. There are names that are initials are simply not any good unless they result in an acronym that makes sense. No name names are useless, and so things like the Continental Can Company or names that don't really make any sense and don't have any meaning to them are useless. The best names are those that are directly locked into the product's benefits. We use the example of Under Armour. Another example would be Healthy Choice frozen foods. What does the name imply? It implies that these particular frozen entrees are what? A healthy choice. All right, so make sure then that the name is pleasing to the ear and sight. The name needs to sound good and look good. Those are the best names. Under Armour is nice, and they've got a nice Under Armour logo that goes with it, with the U and the N, the double U's and that sort of thing. Make sure it's easy to remember. How is the name easy to remember? Well, it's easy to remember, by the way, if it's tied into the product and the product's attributes. Next, coin names need special care. So take two names. One is called Zima. You remember the product called Zima? That was a name that was computer generated. It was a malt liquor that was clear, and they had the Zima campaign based on the name Zima, and they used all these things about Zima. And so they had a whole bunch of words that started with Z. Well, of course, it didn't take very long for clever individuals to argue that an example of this is Zima Zucks. So be careful when you're using coined names. Now, Acura is another computer-generated name, but it sort of somehow implies in its name the precision manufacturing that goes into the Acura automobile. And so while it's a coined term that doesn't really mean anything, it somehow conjures up for us in our minds the idea of precision. Another way to do this is see if there's an old name for sale. That is, an example of that would be, this is an example of Star Union is a name of a brewery that was very popular in where I grew up when I was a child. Now, if you want to come up with a new beer, perhaps you can use the Star Union name because the name had some success in the past and makes sense today. Think multilingual. Make sure that the name is acceptable, it has existing meaning, there's no negative connotations, and it's pronounceable in multiple languages. Remember, we talked a little bit about that when we were doing the environmental scanning in Chapter 6. Getting around a bad name. So if you got a really bad name, what do? Well, you could replace it, right? You could resurrect an old name around it. You could sub-brand it. That is, you could come up with a name around that brand, or you could use a sneaky name, like in the movie Coming to America, where the person didn't own a McDonald's restaurant, but he had a restaurant that looked a lot like McDonald's that he called McDowell's. Now, you really have to be careful when you do that so that you don't end up getting sued for name infringement. Naming categories is also a possibility. So sometimes what you want to do is you want to position your product as different from all the competitors, and the best way to do that is to create your own category. You know, we have something called SUVs, which stands for Sport Utility Vehicles, but now we have a number of SUVs that are called crossovers, and these are a combination of an SUV and a car. And so things like the RAV4 and the Highlander and the Honda Pilot are all referred to as crossovers because they're actually built on car frames. So you might try to find your own category, and make up your own category. So you want to ask yourself, what is your product? Can you own your own category? And some sacrifice might be necessary in that you might turn off some customers by that. You might make an enemy, that is, position yourself against someone. And you want to be careful about using some sort of negative generic categorization, like urban isn't as good as perhaps metropolitan might be. And then you might, in finding a new generic, you want to focus on the facts. You want to really decide on what makes us different and how are we going to make that work. Now, one of the things about research in positioning is that research can either confuse or clarify, and we're going to be talking about research next week. But understand that the more uncertainty we have in the marketplace, the more we want to rely on research to help us sort that out. My recommendation in terms of research is study the competitors, and when you get done studying the competitors, study them some more. But don't get mesmerized by the data. Focus group data is often not accurate. And don't believe what customers say they will do. Believe what customers actually do. And of course, the public relations should complement the positioning strategy. We should have a public relations campaign that helps establish our position and supports our position. Some positioning pitfalls. Most positioning concepts are painfully obvious. We're doing a project right now in my MBA class, and it doesn't appear obvious at the moment, but there must be an obvious way to position the particular experience that we're currently working on. Common sense and consistency are the cornerstones to good positioning. And don't worry about failure, or the future, rather. Position for today. Don't worry about what we might want to do in the future. Avoid the cutesy approach, the Zima's Z campaign. People on the inside are the most likely to try to kill a positioning strategy, and it's because they have personal agendas, a vested interest, and almost everybody else in the organization is going to say, if it's not my idea, it can't be any good. And then finally, positioning is a long-term process that needs attention, consistency, and some TLC, some tender loving care. Avoid the temptation to tinker. As you recall, the marketing slogan for Las Vegas is, what happens in Las Vegas stays in Las Vegas. And that was a very successful campaign. Well, that campaign ran for about 6 years, and then The ad agency who had come up with that campaign in the past decided to try to tinker with it a little bit. And of course, it was not successful. The solution? Go back to the original campaign and let's let it run its full course. Top management must be supportive and champion the position of our product. We also are going to have to fight old decisions and old positions. Once again, implement slowly but consistently and continuously. A little bit about positioning.